Okay, time for Part 2C, Section 3 of the Dismantling the Watchtower series. I'm still in this expose of the Should You Believe in the Trinity booklet. I want to go on to page 24, talking about showing why what we perceive as proof texts of the Trinity are not valid proof texts. It talks about John Calvin and his belief, his handling of John 10:30, where Jesus says the Father and I are one. Excuse me. Now, a lot of Trinitarians will say to you that this is, very much a claim where Jesus claimed to be eternally existent deity. Calvin said, regarding this, ancients made a wrong use of this passage to prove that Christ is of one essence of the Father. Christ does not argue about the unity of substance, but about the agreement which he has with the Father. Now, that would give you the impression that Calvin did not view this as an example of Christ claiming to be God. But he did. Here's what the Watchtower is not telling you. Now, he goes on in that book, which is going to be in the info bar. You say that in his commentary on chapter 10:36, which is basically the next page. Do you say that I blaspheme? The Arians anciently tortured this passage to prove that Christ is not God by nature, but that he possesses a kind of borrowed divinity. But this error is easily refuted, for Christ does not now argue that he is in himself, what he is in himself, but that what we ought to acknowledge him to be, from his miracles in human flesh. For we can never comprehend the eternal divinity unless we embrace him as Redeemer, so far as the Father hath exhibited him to us. Besides, we ought to remember, as I formerly suggested, that Christ does not in this passage fully explain distinctly fully who he is, as he would have done among his disciples, but rather he dwells on refuting the slander of his enemies. He goes on, 10:38, he says, I'm in my Father, that is, I do nothing but by the command of God. So there's mutual connection between me and the Father. For this discourse does not relate to unity of essence, but to the manifestation of the divine power in the person of Christ, which was evident that he was sent by God. And you could read the whole thing, but Calvin very much viewed this as a proof that Jesus claimed to be God. He just didn't believe that he was claiming to be of the same ontological stuff as the Father, which the guys of the Nicene Council used as a proof text, to buttress their position. So once again, more dishonesty from the Watchtower. It's just so sickening, this pamphlet. I hope you JWs are starting to really get the picture here. And I'm just exposing the tip of the iceberg. You can check the whole thing out at Bible.ca. I'm just putting this up there to demonstrate that these guys did do accurate homework here. All right, page 25. Now it talks about equal with God in Philippians 2:6. Let's read. Let's read the passage from the New World Translations. Who, although he was existing in God's form, he gave no consideration to seizure, namely that he should be equal to God. All right, and it quotes from the Expositor's Greek Testament. We cannot find any passage where harpazo, which is seized, or any of its derivatives, has the sense of holding on in possession, retaining. It seems to invariably mean seize, snatch violently. It's not permissible to glide from the true sense, grasp at, into one that is totally different, hold fast. So, what Reverend Kennedy is saying here is that, there's a couple of different ways to look at grasp, the word harpazo. It can mean hold on to and not let somebody take something away from you, or it can mean to grab something off of somebody else, something that isn't yours. And it appears by the way they quote Reverend Kennedy in the Greek Expositor's Testament that he didn't believe that this was an example of Paul saying that this is Jesus being God, or Paul believing that Jesus was God. Well, let's look at the whole quote. He means, of course, in the strictest sense that the pre-existing Christ was divine. But in trying to reach a conception of pre-existing nature of his Lord, he is content to think of him as sharing in that which is the manifestation of the divine nature. He goes on. This equality with God, therefore, consists in his lordship, which has been exalted. He did not regard being on equality with God as something to be seized, violently snatched. He might have used the miraculous powers inherent in his divine nature in such a way as to compel men without further ado to worship him as God. Instead, he was willing to attain this high dignity by the path of humiliation, suffering, and death. Is not this interpretation strongly corroborated by the narrative of his temptation? In other words, Kennedy's assessment, he's saying that this is portraying Christ as uncreated deity, as uncreated God. What it basically he's saying is, Christ, when he was walking on earth, when he took the form of a servant, could have basically demanded that people worship him as God, and rightfully so. He could have done even more spectacular miracles than he did and just forced creation to worship him as deity. But he didn't. He could have, seized it that way, something that was rightfully his. He didn't. He took the form of a servant. He suffered. He lived. He served. He suffered. He died. And now men see him as equal to God because of his exaltation and enthronement. That's what Reverend Kennedy was saying. And of course, the Watchtower couldn't let you know that, that part of the Expositor's Greek New Testament believed that even though you can view harpazo as seizing something away from somebody, that it's still that you can still view it that way and view Christ as being equal to God. So let's wrap up here. Shady business done by the Watchtower in this Trinity pamphlet. Shady business. And believe me, this is just the tip of the iceberg. You can check the Calvin quote and the Expositor's New Testament quote out in the address bar. It's there for you to see, and see if the guys at Bible.ca did their homework. Go check Bible.ca out. The link's there. See just what dirty business the Watchtower did, and then ask yourself, can I still be part of an organization that feels like that the ends justify the means like this? Even if Trinitarianism is false, is it okay to use such shady practices to try to prove it false to people? I don't think so. I guess that's up to between you and God now. We're going to see you next time on part 3, where we talk about how the Watchtower made a false prophecy. See you then.